What happens when the ultimate trophy wife stops being a trophy and starts being a warrior? Arthur Vancer was a king, a billionaire titan worth more than most small countries. He had it all, the penthouse, the jet, and his beautiful, pregnant wife, Serafina. But he also had a secret. His mistress, Chloe. While Arthur popped champagne on his $200 million super yacht with Chloe in Monaco, celebrating his latest triumph, he had no idea what was happening back in New York. He didn't know that his quiet wife had just pulled off the biggest corporate takedown in history, using his own name. The penthouse on Central Park West was less a home than a monument to silence. Its 20-foot, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the park like a painting no one was allowed to touch. Every surface was Namibian white marble or cold, smoked glass. This was the world Arthur Vancer had built, and Serafina Hayes, now Serafina Vancer, was its most prized and most isolated occupant. At 7 months pregnant, Serafina had become acutely aware of the silence. It was a living thing, broken only by the sterile hum of the air filtration system and the distant, muffled sirens of the city below. Arthur was, as usual, gone. This time it was a hostile takeover in Frankfurt. Before that, a liquidity crisis in Singapore. Before that, negotiations in Dubai. His life was a blur of air miles and boardroom conquests, and she was the anchor he dropped in the harbour, expecting her to be exactly where he left her, unmoved and unchanged. Her pregnancy had been a surprise, one that Arthur had greeted with a tight, unsmiling nod. "A Vancer heir," he'd stated, as if discussing a stock acquisition. "Good, we'll need to adjust the trusts." And that was the crux of it all. The trusts. Arthur Vancer, a man whose net worth hovered around $28 billion, was pathologically paranoid about losing his fortune. His empire, Vancer Capital, was a labyrinth of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and holding companies. The beating heart of it all, the keystone of his entire empire, was a single, terrifyingly powerful legal entity, the Atlas Holding Trust. The Atlas Trust was registered in Switzerland, but its assets were global. It held the shares to Vancer Capital, the deeds to their properties in New York, London, and St. Bart's, the ownership of his jet, and even the title to the very penthouse she was standing in. And Arthur, in an act of supreme, arrogant hubris, had made Serafina the sole signatory trustee. It had happened 2 years ago. "My love," he had said, his voice a smooth baritone that could charm markets into submission. He'd presented her with a stack of documents, thick enough to stop a bullet. "This is just a formality, a shield. With the way they're targeting men like me, I need to protect the assets from me." He explained it as a legal firewall. By placing everything in a trust controlled by his non-liable spouse, no lawsuit, no hostile board, no government could ever touch his wealth. He was, in effect, judgment-proof. "You are my fail-safe, Serafina," he'd whispered, kissing her temple. "The one person I can trust with the keys to the kingdom. All it means is you sign where my lawyers tell you to sign. A few papers a year. Nothing for you to worry your beautiful head about." She had smiled and signed. She had, after all, been a Columbia law graduate herself, a fact Arthur found adorable, but ultimately irrelevant. He'd wanted a wife, not a partner. So she had packed her degree away, figuratively and literally, and become Mrs. Vancer. Now she stood in the nursery, a room painted a soft, gender-neutral grey that felt as cold as the marble in the foyer. The $40,000 crib, imported from Italy, sat empty. She ran a hand over the polished wood, her other hand resting on the swell of her belly. The baby kicked, a sharp, sudden reminder of the life inside her. She was worried. Not about the pregnancy, which was healthy, but about the change in Arthur. The distance had become a chasm. The texts were shorter. The I love yous had vanished, replaced by a clipped, acknowledged from his executive assistant. A small, nagging fear, born of loneliness, had begun to grow. Arthur was a man of voracious appetites, and she had not been on his menu for months. She walked back into the living room, the city lights just beginning to twinkle against the deep blue of twilight. His iPad, the one synced to his cloud, was on the charger. He often left it behind, claiming he preferred the secure workflow on his encrypted laptop. A notification lit up the screen. It wasn't a text, it was a calendar reminder from CR. Event: Monaco Grand Prix, yacht party. Note: pack the Cartier. He loved it last time. Seraphina's blood ran cold. CR Chloe Radford. A consultant from his London office, a woman with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper ambition, whom Seraphina had met once at a charity gala. Arthur had introduced her as his top new acquisition specialist. Seraphina had recognized her as competition. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the tablet. Arthur's password was, predictably, the ticker symbol of his first major acquisition, VNC9I8. She didn't look at the calendar. Her gut told her to look somewhere else. The Voice Memos app. Arthur was old school. He hated typing, preferring to dictate notes to his team. She scanned the list. Memo on Siberian deal. Note to Legalry, SEC. Draft for board. And then, one that made her heart stop. File name, SV Contingency. Date, 3 days ago. She pressed play. The room was silent, save for the hum of the fridge. Arthur's voice filled the air. Not the smooth baritone he used with her, but the cold, clinical tone he used for business. He wasn't talking to his assistant. The other voice was deeper, more measured. She recognized it as Martin Lewis, his lead divorce attorney. And the prenatal, Martin was saying. She'll fight on that. She can't, Arthur's voice replied, bored. The post-nup is ironclad. She signed it last year when we refinanced the London flat. She gets the $10 million severance, the apartment for 5 years. That's it. And the child, Arthur? A Vancer heir changes the optics. The courts will do nothing, Arthur snapped. That's the point of this call, Martin. I want you to start the file. The moment that thing is born, we file for sole custody. Seraphina let out a small, strangled gasp. On what grounds? Martin asked, sounding skeptical. On the grounds that she is unstable, Arthur said, and the casual cruelty in his voice stole her breath. She's emotional, erratic. We've been documenting it for months. Her assistant reports every time she cries. Her obsession with the nursery. Her anxiety. By the time I'm done, the judge will think she's a paranoid hysteric who is a danger to the child. The Vancer heir will be raised by me. She can take her 10 million and go back to whatever suburban mediocrity she came from. Understood? There was a pause. Understood, Arthur. The recording ended. Seraphina stood frozen, the tablet clutched in her hand. The city lights blurred through the tears that streamed, hot and silent, down her face. It wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a character assassination. It was a plot to steal her child. He had called her child that thing. He had been building a cage of instability around her, using her own pregnancy hormones, her own loneliness, as the bars. He thought she was a quiet, emotional, stupid trophy. He thought she was just a beautiful head, not to be worried. A cold, clear rage, sharper than any grief, settled over her. He had made one fatal mistake. He had trusted the trophy on the shelf with the keys to the kingdom. He had forgotten she wasn't just a Vancer. She was a Hayes, and she had graduated 5th in her class from Columbia Law. She unlocked her phone Her fingers no longer trembling, she scrolled past her doctor, past her mother, to a name she hadn't called in 3 years. Julian Croft. "Julian," she said, her voice perfectly level when he answered. "It's Serafina. I have a problem. I need a lawyer. No, not a divorce lawyer. I need a corporate one. A very, very good one." The call to Julian Croft was like stepping back into a life she'd thought was buried. Julian had been her study partner at Columbia, a man whose mind was as sharp as his perpetually rumpled suits were soft. He was the opposite of Arthur in every way, quiet where Arthur was boisterous, empathetic where Arthur was dominant, and brilliant in a way that was collaborative, not predatory. Julian had been the one who'd lamented her retirement when she announced her engagement. "Don't let him dull your blade, Sarah," he'd warned her, using his old nickname for her. "It's the sharpest one I know." Now, she needed that blade. They met not in a flashy downtown office, but in the discreet, wood-paneled reading room of the New York City Bar Association Library. It was neutral territory, quiet, and filled with the comforting smell of old books and floor wax. Julian looked older. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his hair lightly frosted with grey at the temples, but his eyes were the same, kind, intense, and deeply intelligent. He didn't greet her with pity. He waited. Serafina, wearing a simple black maternity dress, her face pale but resolute, didn't waste time on pleasantries. She slid the iPad across the heavy oak table. "Put in these earbuds," she said, her voice low. "Listen to the file named SV Contingency." Julian watched her, his brow furrowing. But he did as she asked. For 5 minutes, he sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the polished table. Serafina watched his jaw tighten, the only sign of his rising fury. When the recording finished, he slowly removed the earbuds, placing them on the table as if they were contaminated. He took a long, slow breath and looked up at her, his eyes unreadable. "Well," he finally said, his voice a low rasp. "He's not just a monster. He's a meticulous one." "He thinks I'm a hysteric," Serafina said, her voice flat. "He's building a case to take my baby." "He's building a case to steal your child, Serafina," Julian corrected her, the legal distinction clear. "And he's using your pre-agreed post-nuptial agreement as the financial hammer to make you powerless to fight him. He'll drain you in court until your $10 million severance is dust." "I know," she said. "He's flying to Monaco tomorrow for the Grand Prix. He'll be on his yacht with his mistress, Chloe Radford. He thinks I'm here in this apartment, weeping and painting a nursery." Julian leaned forward. "What do you want to do, Sarah? We can file first. We can use this recording to petition for an emergency hearing. We can fight for the child." Serafina shook her head. The movement was small, but absolute. "Fight? Julian, he is the fight. He owns the judges. He owns the lawyers. Have you heard of Martin Lewis, the man he was speaking to? He's a shark. I'll be shredded. My instability will be leaked to every gossip column, and his PR team will paint me as a gold-digging, unhinged mother. I'll lose. And I will not lose my child." A long silence settled between them. Julian studied her, seeing the woman he used to know, the strategist, the analyst, emerge from the polished shell of the billionaire's wife. "So what are you saying?" Serafina finally met his gaze, and for the first time, Julian saw the fire. "He built his entire empire on one single point of failure," she said, her voice as cold and clear as ice. "He put all his assets, everything that makes him Arthur Vancer, into the Atlas Holding Trust." Julian's eyes widened. He knew of the Atlas Trust. It was a legend in financial law, a fortress. "My God, I'd heard rumors, but I didn't realize. Who is the trustee?" Serafina raised her hand, her diamond ring catching the dim library light. Sole signatory, me. He called me his fail-safe. Julian let out a breath that was almost a laugh. It was a sound of pure, astonished disbelief. He made his wife, a Columbia law graduate, the sole trustee of his entire $28 billion fortune, and then he plotted to steal her child. He shook his head. The hubris, it's Shakespearean. He didn't marry a lawyer, Julian. He married a beautiful head. He forgot. Okay, Julian said, his mind now racing, the lawyer in him taking over. Okay, Serafina, this changes things. This isn't a divorce. This is a corporate dissolution. What's the charter of the trust? What are your powers? Broad, Serafina said, a grim smile touching her lips. I spent all last night reading the 400-page agreement. He was so paranoid about government seizure that he gave the trustee unprecedented power in a state of emergency or moral crisis. The trustee has the power to act unilaterally to protect the integrity and future legacy of the trust's assets. He has the power to liquidate. He has the power to transfer. He has the power to dissolve all holdings and move the capital to a more secure vehicle. And what, Julian asked, does Arthur Vancer consider a moral crisis? The agreement defines it as any action by the beneficiary, that's him, that could bring the Vancer name into disrepute. I'd say planning to frame his pregnant wife as unstable to steal his own heir qualifies. Julian stared at her. You're not planning to fight him in family court, are you? No, Serafina said. I'm planning to disarm him. Completely. He can't fight for custody if he can't pay his lawyers. He can't run a smear campaign if he can't pay his PR firm. He wants to leave me with $10 million and no child. I'm going to leave him with nothing but his name. And I'm going to tarnish that, too. Sarah, the scale of this is astronomical. This isn't just moving money. This is evaporating a global entity. The financial markets, the SEC, the Swiss authorities. This will be an explosion. It will, she agreed calmly, which is why it needs to be surgical. He's celebrating his latest acquisition, a German tech firm, Siberian. The deal is set to close in 48 hours. He's using Vancer Capital liquidity to fund it, which means he's about to make the largest capital request from the Atlas Trust all year. He's already sent the signatory papers to my secure digital portal. He needs you to sign off on the acquisition, Julian breathed, seeing the chessboard. He does, Serafina said. He's on his yacht, the Vanguard, in Monaco, waiting for me to press the approve button. But I'm not going to approve the transfer to Siberian. I'm going to use that same portal to execute Article 7, Section 4 of the Trust Agreement, Emergency Dissolution and Asset Reallocation. Reallocation to where? Julian asked, his voice barely a whisper. He was always obsessed with philanthropy, not because he's charitable, but because it was a good look. He set up a dozen Vancer Family Foundation shells, but never funded them. They are legitimate 501(c) 3 charitable entities. The trust agreement explicitly allows for unlimited capital transfers to any of them. You're not going to take the money, Julian realized. You're going to give it away. I'm going to liquidate Vancer Capital, she corrected. Every stock, every bond, every real estate holding. I'm going to dump it all, take the multi-billion-dollar loss just to get the liquidity, and then I'm going to wire the entire sum, all $28 billion or whatever's left after the fire sale, into a new foundation. A new foundation? One I'm founding tomorrow, not the Vancer Foundation. It will be called the Hayes Foundation for Maternal and Child Health. It will be dedicated to providing legal and financial aid to mothers like me, who are being bullied by powerful men in custody battles. Julian Croft, a man who had seen the worst of corporate greed, who had argued cases before the Supreme Court, felt a genuine chill run down his spine. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. It was a scorched earth, righteous, and, most terrifyingly, perfectly legal act of war. "He'll be ruined," Julian said. "Not just poor, he'll be liable. The moment Vancer Capital is dissolved, all his corporate protections, they vanish. The lawsuits he's been shielding with the trust, they'll all come for him personally." "Yes," Serafina said. "He won't just be poor, he'll be in debt for the rest of his life." "When do you plan to do this?" "He's expecting the signature in 48 hours. That's when his party on the yacht begins. He'll be popping champagne with her, celebrating his new acquisition, and at that exact moment, I'll be hitting execute." Julian nodded slowly. He closed his laptop. The decision was made. "All right, Serafina. Let's get to work. We have less than 2 days to dismantle an empire. We're going to need a bigger library." The next 48 hours were a blur of cold brew coffee, encrypted hard drives, and legal warfare. Julian transformed his small, respectable law firm, Croft & Associates, into a sealed command center. He brought in 2 people he trusted implicitly: a forensic accountant named Maria Gonzalez, a woman who could find a single misplaced penny inside a dragon's hoard, and a stoic Swiss banking lawyer named Dr. Eris Thorne, who was flown in from Geneva on a private charter paid for by Serafina's personal credit card. They worked out of a windowless conference room, the walls covered in whiteboards, mapping the labyrinth of Vancer Capital's holdings. It was, as Maria put it, a snake eating its own tail. "He's a monster of leverage," Maria explained, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "He doesn't own $28 billion in cash. He owns $28 billion in assets, all of which are cross-collateralized. He's used the shares in his tech portfolio to secure the loans for his real estate, and used the real estate to secure the private jet. The Atlas Trust is the linchpin. The moment you pull it, the entire Jenga tower collapses," Julian finished, "which is exactly the point." Serafina was the calm center of the storm. Her pregnancy, far from being a weakness, had become her focus. Every time a wave of fear or doubt threatened to overwhelm her, she would place a hand on her stomach and remember Arthur's voice. That thing. The memory was a whetstone, sharpening her resolve. She was no longer Serafina Vancer, the socialite. She was Serafina Hayes, Esquors, the chief architect of the largest financial demolition in history. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice crisp, "the Swiss side. When I trigger the dissolution clause, what is the protocol? Will the bankers at Banque Pictet freeze the transaction?" Dr. Thorne, a precise man in a flawless suit, adjusted his spectacles. "Ordinarily, yes. A transaction of this magnitude would trigger dozens of automated holds. However," he said, "the trust agreement you provided is unique." Article 7, Section 4. The Moral Crisis Clause. It contains a no-contest waiver. The beneficiary, Mr. Vancer, explicitly waived his right to challenge, delay, or investigate any action taken by the trustee under this specific clause. He was so terrified of the U.S. government freezing his assets that he gave you, his trustee, the power of a financial deity. The Swiss bankers cannot legally stop the transfer. Their hands are tied by the very document he created to protect himself. So the moment I hit execute, the dissolution begins. The liquidation will be automated. The algorithms will start selling. It will be a bloodbath on the market, but it will be fast. The funds will then be consolidated and, per your instruction, wired. It will take approximately 15 minutes for the automated systems to execute. 15 minutes to liquidate an empire. Good, Serafina said. Now, Maria, the new entity, the Hayes Foundation. Registered this morning in Delaware, with a sister entity in Switzerland to receive the funds, Maria said, sliding a document across the table. I've backdated its charter, perfectly legally, using a shell I've held for years. As of this moment, the Hayes Foundation is a fully vetted, globally recognized charitable organization. Its mission statement is ironclad: to provide legal, financial, and residential support for parents and children navigating custodial disputes against partners with disproportionate financial power. It's beautiful, really. So, the money isn't going to me, Serafina clarified, looking at Julian. This was the most important part. No, Julian said, a fierce pride in his eyes. You are not enriching yourself. You are not stealing the money. That would be a crime. You are, as the sole trustee of the Atlas Trust, making a catastrophic but legal business decision. You are fulfilling your fiduciary duty as you interpret it under the moral crisis clause. You have deemed that Arthur Vance's name is in disrepute and that the best way to protect the integrity and future legacy of the Trust's assets is to move them into a charitable foundation in your maiden name, dedicated to fighting men exactly like him. He will sue, Serafina stated. He will try, Julian countered. He will claim you were unstable, coerced, incompetent. Which, Serafina said, is why I had this done this morning. She slid another paper onto the table. It was a psychiatric evaluation, signed by 3 separate, board-certified psychiatrists from Weill Cornell. Full competency panel, declared of exceptionally sound mind, clear judgment, and demonstrating no signs of emotional distress or coercion. I told them I was a pregnant woman about to sign a complex new will. They were happy to oblige. His unstable hysteric case just vanished. Maria Gonzalez let out a low whistle. Damn, girl, you really are a shark. He taught me to be, Serafina replied, her face hard. The final piece was the logistics, the Siberian deal. Arthur was waiting for his $4.5 billion transfer. The notification sat waiting in Serafina's secure digital portal, a Swiss-based system called HelvetiSign. This is the key, Julian said, pointing to the screen. You can't just ignore this. You have to use it. The system is waiting for an approve or deny command. We're going to add a third option. Dr. Thorne explained. We will use the deny function. But in the reason for denial field, which allows for attached signatory commands, we will insert the execution code for Article 7, Section 4. The moment you hit deny on his $4.5 billion acquisition, you will simultaneously trigger the $28 billion dissolution of the entire trust. The deny command is the trigger. The poetry, Julian murmured. In denying him his new toy, you take away all the others. Serafina looked at the clock. It was 3:00 p.m. in New York. In Monaco, it was 9:00 p.m. The party on the Vanguard would be in full swing. Arthur would be on the deck, champagne in hand, checking his watch. It's time, she said. She logged into the penthouse, not her real one, but a secure remote desktop that mimicked her home computer, a digital breadcrumb designed to place her at home when she pulled the trigger. She opened the HelvetiSign portal. There it was. Transaction request. VCAP CYB 4.555B. Awaiting trustee signature. Approve. Deny Julian, Maria, and Dr. Thorne stood behind her, a silent council of war. Are you ready, Serafina? Julian asked gently. Serafina thought of the cold nursery. She thought of the voice memo. She thought of Chloe Radford's calendar reminder. Pack the Cartier. She moved the cursor and clicked. Dinny. A new box popped up. Please provide reason for denial. Optional. Attach signatory commands. Her fingers were steady. She did not type a word. She simply pasted the 200-line execution code that Dr. Thorne and his team had written. A code that instructed the Swiss bank's automated system to 1. Cancel VCAP CYB 45B. 2. Invoke Article 7 SEC 4 Moral Crisis. 3. Initiate immediate liquidation of all assets held by Atlas Holding Trust. 4. Consolidate all resulting liquidity. 5. Transfer 100% of consolidated funds. To Act 288 Guhay's Foundation. Geneva. 6. Execute. She hovered her mouse over the final Submit button. 15 minutes, Dr. Thorne said quietly. Once you click, the world changes. Serafina clicked. The screen flashed. Command received. Processing. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Maria Gonzalez's laptop, which was monitoring Vansa Capital's public stock tickers, began to chirp. Then it began to scream. "It's happening," Maria whispered, her eyes wide. "My God, look at the VCAP ticker. It's a waterfall. The algorithms are selling, tranche after tranche. They're dumping everything." Serafina didn't look. She closed the laptop. She stood up, the movement slow and deliberate for her pregnant belly. "Thank you, gentlemen." "Maria," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "For your services, your invoices will be paid in full from my personal account, as agreed. Dr. Thorne, I trust you will be on your plane back to Geneva tonight." "Of course, Mrs. Vansa," he said, already packing his briefcase. "It's Hayes," she corrected him. "Ms. Serafina Hayes." Julian walked her to the elevator. The adrenaline was leaving, and she was shaking. "Sarah, you need to go. Now! Where is your go-bag?" "In the car downstairs. The driver is waiting." "Where will you go?" "A place no one would ever look for me. A small maternity clinic in Vermont. Quiet, safe. My file is under a different name. I'll be there until the baby is born." "Good," he said. He reached out, not to hug her, but just to grip her shoulder. "You did it, Sarah. You're free." "No," she said, looking up at him, her eyes clear and terrifying. "He's not. Not yet." She stepped into the elevator, leaving him in the hallway. The doors closed, and Serafina Hayes, the woman who had just evaporated 28 billion, was gone. The lights of Monte Carlo were a smear of diamond dust against the black velvet of the Mediterranean. On the water, anchored in the most prominent position in Port Hercules, the Vanguard was not just a super yacht. It was a 300-foot statement of absolute power. It was a floating, pulsing nightclub, thumping with music, its decks overflowing with models, princelings, rival financiers and hangers-on. And at the center of it all, holding court, was Arthur Vansa. He was in his element. Dressed in a custom-made white linen suit, his $300,000 Richard Mille watch catching the light, he felt invincible. The Monaco Grand Prix was a backdrop. The real celebration was his. "The Siberian deal, darling." He was booming to a Russian oligarch, a glass of 1996 Dom Perignon in his hand. "The Germans thought they could fight me. They thought their board was unified. I bought their board, one by one. The deal closes tonight, 9 p.m. New York time. By morning, Vansa Capital will be the largest name in AI security." At his side, clinging to his arm, was Chloe Radford. She was stunning in a glittering, backless red dress, and around her neck was the Cartier necklace. It was a cascade of emeralds and diamonds, the one Serafina had seen in Arthur's private safe just a month ago. His mother's necklace. He had told Serafina it was too precious to wear, and was waiting for the right occasion. Chloe, sensing his gaze, smiled up at him. "It's a triumph, Arthur. You deserve this. You've worked so hard." "We worked hard, darling," he corrected, pulling her close and kissing her, a public display for the circling gossip photographers. He was branding her as his. The consultant was being promoted. He felt a savage thrill. Serafina was a good wife, quiet, dutiful, but she had no fire. Chloe understood ambition. She understood him. He thought fleetingly of his wife, back in the cold penthouse, probably organizing the baby's layette, or crying over some hormonal nonsense. He'd have Martin Lewis serve the papers the week after the birth. It would be clean. He was, above all, a man who valued efficiency. His executive assistant, a young man named Peterson, approached him, holding a satellite phone. "Sir, it's 9:05 p.m. in New York. The 15-minute window for the Siberian transfer has passed. We've received no confirmation from Banque Pictet." Arthur's good humor faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "What?" "Serafina was supposed to sign at 9. She knows the schedule. Get her on the phone." "We've tried her, sir," Peterson said, looking nervous. "Her phone goes straight to voicemail, and her assistant says she left the building 2 hours ago with bags." "With bags?" Arthur barked, his voice loud enough to quiet the music nearby. "What do you mean, with bags? Get the bank manager in Geneva on the line, now." Peterson fumbled with the phone. A few minutes later, he handed it to Arthur. "Mr. Vancer, this is Jean-Luc Haas from Pictet. How can I— Haas, where is my 4.5 billion? Why hasn't the Siberian transfer been executed? My wife was to sign the order at 21 and EST. There was a stiff, uncomfortable silence from the other end. "Ah, Mr. Vancer. There seems to be a significant development. We did receive the signatory command from Trustee Hayes at 21:01 EST. Arthur sighed in relief, running a hand through his hair. Good. So it's done. Why the delay?" "Sir, the command was not approve. The trustee, she issued a deny command on the Siberian transfer." Arthur Vancer froze, the champagne glass in his hand tilted. "She what? She denied it. That's impossible. She doesn't have the authority to—" "She does, Mr. Vancer." The banker's voice was suddenly very, very cold. This was no longer a client conversation. It was a legal notification, and the deny command also contained a signatory attachment. "Sir, per the moral crisis clause of the Atlas Holding Trust, Article 7, Section 4, Trustee Hayes has initiated a full dissolution and asset reallocation." The world tilted. The music on the yacht seemed to fade, replaced by a roaring in Arthur's ears. "Hey! What? Haas, what the hell are you talking about? Stop it. Whatever it is, stop it now." "We cannot stop it, Mr. Vancer," Haas said, his Swiss formality absolute. "Per the no-contest waiver you signed, we are legally bound to execute the trustee's command. The process, it's already complete." "Complete? What is complete?" Arthur was shouting now. Chloe had stepped back, her hand flying to her mouth. "The automated liquidation of all assets held by the Atlas Trust is complete, sir. The resulting liquidity, a sum of, mon Dieu, $26.4 billion after market losses, has been transferred." "Transferred? Transferred where? To my reserve account? Where is it, Haas?" "It has been transferred, per her instructions, as a one-time, irreversible philanthropic donation to a Swiss-based charitable entity, a foundation called the Hayes Foundation." The champagne glass slipped from Arthur's fingers. It did not shatter. It hit the teak deck with a dull, heavy thud, rolling to a stop. Chloe whispered, "Hayes? That's her name." Arthur stared at the phone. "You're telling me my money, all of it, is gone? The Atlas Holding Trust is now an empty shell, Mr. Vancer, which means Vancer Capital is also an empty shell. It has 0 assets, and, sir, its credit lines, they are all now in default." A new alert buzzed on Peterson's tablet, and another. and another. A flurry of red flag emails. "Sir," Peterson said, his voice trembling. "JP Morgan is calling the note on the jet. Credit Suisse is freezing your personal accounts. The VCAP ticker, it's been halted. Trading suspended. It's at zero." Arthur Vancer, the Titan, the King, stumbled back. He grabbed the deck railing to steady himself. He looked at the lights of Monaco, but they no longer looked like diamonds. They looked like an inferno. "Get me the plane," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Sir," Peterson said, pale as a ghost. We don't have a plane. It's been seized." The party was still going. The music was thumping. But on the top deck, Arthur Vancer was a man suffocating in open air. He saw Chloe staring at him, her face a mask of calculation and horror. She was already mentally divesting. The Cartier necklace suddenly looked like a noose. Serafina, he breathed. The name was acid on his tongue. He had been so busy plotting to steal her child, he hadn't realized she was busy stealing his world. He had underestimated the beautiful head. He had forgotten the Columbia Law degree. He pushed past Peterson, past a bewildered-looking Chloe, and stormed to his stateroom. He grabbed his personal laptop, the encrypted one. He had to see it. He had to see the accounts. He logged into his private portal at Pictet, where there had been a balance of $28,450,000. There was now a single line item. Balance, $0.12.0. Account status, closed. The journey back from Monaco was a 24-hour humiliation. Arthur Vancer, a man who hadn't flown commercial in 2 decades, was forced to use his last liquid funds, the $100,000 in cash he kept in his stateroom safe, to buy a last-minute first-class ticket on Air France. He sat, crammed in a pod, stewing in a volcanic, impotent rage. His phones were useless. Every call was a new voice of doom. His board members were either resigning or screaming at him. His lawyers, including Martin Lewis, were demanding retainers he could no longer pay. He landed at JFK, not to his private car service, but to a swarm of paparazzi and financial journalists. "Mr. Vancer, is it true Vancer Capital is bankrupt? Arthur, did your wife steal your money? Vancer! Vancer!" He pushed through them, a wild animal cornered, and threw himself into a yellow cab, shouting his address. "Central Park West, and drive." He stormed into the lobby of his building, the doorman looking at him with a new expression, not fear, but pity. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like an eternity. He slammed his keycard against the lock. Access denied. He tried again. Access denied. "Serafina!" he roared, banging on the solid oak door. "Open this door! Open it right now, you!" The door opened. But it wasn't Serafina. It was a broad-shouldered man in a black suit with an earpiece. "Can I help you, sir?" the man said, blocking the doorway. "Who the hell are you? Get out of my home!" Arthur tried to push past him. The man didn't budge. "This is not your home, Mr. Vancer. This property is no longer owned by the Atlas Trust. It is now the primary asset of the Hayes Foundation. My job is to secure it until the new owners take possession. You are trespassing." "Trespassing?" Arthur's voice cracked. "My wife. Serafina. Where is she? Ms. Hayes is no longer in residence. She did, however, leave this for you." The security guard handed Arthur a single, crisp, cream-colored envelope. His name was written on the front in Serafina's perfect, elegant script. Arthur ripped it open. It was not a letter. It was a legal notice. It was a single piece of paper, a carbon copy of a restraining order filed by Julian Croft. It barred Arthur Vancer from coming within 1,000 feet of Serafina Hayes, citing credible threats of emotional and psychological abuse and conspiracy to commit custodial kidnapping. Tucked inside was a printout, a bank statement from a new account at Chase. Account holder, Serafina Hayes. Balance, $10,000. At the bottom, a handwritten note. Arthur, this is the $10 million severance package, as stipulated by our post-nuptial agreement. I always honor my contracts. As for the rest, I am simply acting as trustee to protect the Vansa legacy from your moral crisis. You were planning to take my child. You will find that he and I are now very, very well protected. You underestimated me. You thought I was a decoration. You forgot that decorations can be listening. Enjoy your new life. I hear suburban mediocrity isn't so bad. S.H. He crushed the letter in his fist. Serafina! He screamed, the sound echoing impotently in the marble hallway. The security guard simply closed the door in his face. The soft snick of the deadbolt was the sound of his life ending. He stumbled back to the elevator. He was a king without a kingdom, a billionaire without a dollar. He walked out onto the street, dazed. The city he once owned now seemed impossibly large and threatening. He had nothing. No home, no money, no jet. Even Chloe Radford had, predictably, vanished, her phone disconnected. She was last seen at the airport in Nice, boarding a flight to Zurich, still wearing the Cartier necklace. The next days were a cascade of legal destruction. He wasn't just broke. As Julian had predicted, he was liable. With Vansa Capital and the Atlas Trust dissolved, the corporate veil was gone. Every lawsuit he'd ever settled, every high-risk loan, every leveraged deal, they all came crashing down onto him, personally. He was sued by the shareholders of Siberian for breach of contract. He was sued by his own board for gross negligence. He was sued by the banks, the lenders and the governments of 3 different countries. The man who had been worth $28 billion was within a week $500 million in personal debt. He tried to fight. He hired a public defender-level lawyer to sue Serafina. The case was thrown out in 10 minutes. The judge read the Atlas Trust agreement. Mr. Vansa, the judge said, not even looking up from the paper. You gave your wife, the trustee, the explicit, unilateral, and non-contestable power to do exactly what she did. You may find her actions unpalatable, but they were, according to the very document your lawyers drafted, perfectly legal. You have no case. Case dismissed. He tried to claim she was unstable. Julian Croft presented the 3-doctor competency panel report. He tried to claim she stole the money. Julian Croft presented the Hayes Foundation charter, proving she hadn't taken a dime for herself, other than the $10 million she was legally owed by their marriage contract. He was checkmated. He was done. The final devastating blow came from his own past. A small tech startup he had bankrupted in 1998, a company whose founder had sworn revenge, had kept their lawsuit alive for decades. Now, with Arthur Vansa's protections gone, they were first in line at the bankruptcy hearing. They didn't just take his money, they took his name. As part of the settlement, the judge ruled that Arthur Vansa was barred from using his own name, or Vansa, in any future business dealings. He was, in every sense of the word, erased. 6 months passed. The financial world had moved on, having absorbed the shock of the Vansa Capital collapse. It was now a case study at Harvard Business School, a lesson in hubris and the dangers of a flawed legal structure. The Vansa implosion, they called it. In a quiet, sun-drenched town in Vermont, in a beautiful but modest farmhouse far from the glass towers of New York, Serafina Hayes was rocking her son. His name was Alexander Hayes, not Vansa. He was small, perfect, and had his mother's calm, observant eyes. The house was comfortable, filled with soft fabrics, warm woods, and the smell of baby powder and fresh-baked bread. It was a home, not a museum. The $10 million severance was more than enough to secure a future for them, but Serafina was living quietly. She didn't need the billions. She just needed this. The front door opened, and Julian Croft walked in, stamping snow from his boots. He wasn't wearing a suit, but a worn flannel shirt and jeans. He smiled as he saw her and the baby. "He's getting big," Julian said, his voice soft. "He's a good baby." Serafina smiled, genuine happiness radiating from her. "He sleeps." "You look good, Sarah." "Peaceful." "I am," she said. "The air is clean up here." "No." "Ghosts." Julian handed her a file. "Well, the ghosts are finally being buried. The bankruptcy court is finished. It's all settled." "And him?" she asked, her voice neutral. She didn't need to say the name. "Arthur?" "He's a non-entity," Julian said, sitting across from her. "He lost everything. The federal bankruptcy judge stripped him of his passport until his debts are settled, which they never will be. He's living in a rented, one-bedroom apartment in Queens. Someone saw him riding the subway." Serafina absorbed this. Not with triumph, but with a quiet, somber finality. He wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a man, a pathetic, broken man. "And the foundation?" she asked. Julian's face lit up. "Ah, now that is the real news." He pulled out an iPad. The Hayes Foundation for Maternal and Child Health officially launched its public operations today. With $26.04 billion in assets, it is, overnight, the largest charitable foundation of its kind in human history. He showed her the press release. It was the lead story on every newswire. "The foundation," the release read, "will provide grants to legal aid clinics, fund women's shelters, and directly pay the legal fees for parents in contentious custody battles. Its first major initiative is a $500 million grant to fund a network of lawyers dedicated to fighting custodial extortion cases." "You did it, Sarah," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just save yourself. You're going to save thousands of women, thousands of children. You've turned the ugliest part of his legacy into the most beautiful part of yours." Serafina looked at the press release, then down at her sleeping son. She thought of the voice memo, the cold plot to steal this tiny, perfect life. He wanted an heir, she whispered. He wanted a legacy. Well, this is it. This is the Vancer legacy. Not a building, not a stock ticker. A shield for every mother who gets told she's unstable by a man who thinks he's a god. She looked at Julian, her oldest, truest friend. "Thank you, Julian. For everything. For remembering who I was when I'd forgotten." "You were never forgotten, Sarah," he said. "You were just dormant." Far away in Queens, Arthur Vancer watched the same news story on a flickering 20-inch television in his bare apartment. He watched as Serafina's name was lauded. He saw her, a modern-day saint, the avenging angel of motherhood, as one headline called her. He saw his money, his $26 billion, being given away to fight him. It was the final, perfect, crushing irony. He hadn't just been outplayed. He had been rewritten. His entire life's work, his greed, his conquests, his name, all of it had been hijacked, melted down, and reforged into a weapon against his own kind. He was nobody. She and the child he'd tried to steal were now everything. The king was dead. Long live the queen. A year later, the Hayes Foundation was a global force. Serafina Hayes, though she remained a deeply private figure, was one of the most powerful women in the world. She ran the foundation from her home in Vermont, delegating the public-facing duties to Julian, whom she'd named as the foundation's CEO. They were a formidable team. Arthur Vancer was a ghost. He'd been spotted once, working as a consultant, under his middle name, John, for a failing small-cap logistics company in New Jersey. The photo that circulated showed a man who had aged 20 years. His hair was white, his expensive suits replaced by a rumpled, off-the-rack polyester blend. He was gaunt, haunted. The world had forgotten him. But Serafina had not. One cold Tuesday in November, Arthur received a certified letter. He almost didn't open it, assuming it was another creditor. But the return address was Croft and Associates. Inside was not a lawsuit. It was a check. It was for $5,000. Attached was a short, typed note. Mr. Vancer enclosed. Please find a charitable stipend from the Hayes Foundation. Our records indicate you meet the criteria for our Disenfranchised Partners program. An individual left with zero assets and disproportionate financial power following a marital dissolution. This stipend is paid monthly, contingent on your continued compliance with the 1,000-foot restraining order. We believe everyone deserves a second chance. Sincerely, the Hayes Foundation, Grants Department. Arthur stared at the check. It wasn't mercy. It was a statement. It was the final, meticulous, devastating act of dominance. She had taken his empire, his name, and his future. And now she was paying him an allowance. She was, in the end, paying his rent. The money he had earned was now being gifted back to him, $1 at a time, by the very woman he had tried to destroy. He didn't cash the check. He didn't rip it up. He just sat in his empty room, the paper trembling in his hand. And for the first time since it all began, Arthur Vancer finally, completely, broke. He wept. Not for his money, not for his power, but for the simple, terrible fact that he had been so completely and utterly beaten. The trophy on his shelf had won the war and was now, in an act of ultimate, charitable power, keeping him as a pet. And so, Arthur Vancer became a ghost in the financial world, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms about the danger of hubris and of underestimating the person beside you. Serafina Hayes, however, finally found her name. She proved that the person everyone dismisses is often the most powerful one in the room. Her revenge wasn't just taking the money. It was a masterstroke of legal justice. She redirected his entire legacy of greed into a future of hope for thousands. What do you think? Was Serafina's move a brilliant act of justice or a cold-hearted betrayal that went too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of power, betrayal, and ultimate vindication, please make sure to hit that like button. Share it with a friend who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more incredible dramas like this every single week. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.